Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. And I'm going to present evidence on what I feel is a central question for Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition and the history of the game. And that is, does Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition honor Gary Gygax? Huge question, right? So, and I think there's evidence on both sides, and there are definitely people on both sides of this. So my answer is yes. Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition absolutely honors Gary Gygax. However, since there's very clear evidence on both sides of the question, I think it's worth exploring, and I think we need to present evidence on both sides to get to the answer, right? So there are, at minimum, there's me saying yes. Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, the best thing it does to honor Gary Gygax is it just raises... No edition of the game has ever done a better job of making Dungeons & Dragons world famous than Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. Nothing. Okay? And you can see that there's so much evidence of this. Critical Role's success, they run Dungeons & Dragons, and their game is more watched than any game in Dungeons & Dragons history. Also, under Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, there's some major things that have emerged. You could be a professional dungeon master today. There aren't many of them, but probably can count them. I think you could count the number of actual professional dungeon masters on two hands, but you can get there, right? That's a fact. There's a lot of people who are making real dollars, getting paid real money to dungeon master, and that has not. I don't think that existed in any other version, and it certainly doesn't exist at the platform level we have today, right? So just by the fact that Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition carries the banner of Dungeons & Dragons farther and waves it higher than any other edition of the game, that points to Gary Gygax, and Gary Gygax's legacy grows directly in proportion to the current version, right? All right, but let me say the piece of information that is most damaging to my position. That is, Gary's name is not on the 5th edition books, right? This shocked me. I couldn't believe this was the case. But increasingly, I think his name might be in a small minority of the books, but if a new Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition book drops today, Gary's name ain't in it, period, okay? Now, so why is that? Well, we don't really know the answer. There's a lot of Dungeons & Dragons mysteries, and this is one of them, right? So I think what's happening today at Wizards of the Coast is that there are Gygax allies. There are people who, and some of them are actually Gygax champions, but I think you can't really talk about Gary Gygax directly in Wizards of the Coast today. And I've been thinking a lot about this. I don't think that has anything to do with Dungeons & Dragons. We live in a world today where we eat historical heroes. We just chew them up and spit them out. And right now that's happening with the Founding Fathers of America. Statues are being taken down, and there's a huge debate on whether we should present the Founding Fathers as monsters or heroes, right? Huge debate, right? So this really has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. We simply now live in a world where people don't respect the idea of transition through time, right? They're like, hey, you lived 100 years ago, you better have my values of today, right? And if you don't, you're a horrible monster, right? And I really stand against that. I don't think that's great, right? I definitely think that, like, George Washington was a massive hero. Abraham Lincoln was a massive hero. And, Harriet Tubman was a huge hero at the same level as Gary Gygax, right? All American heroes, right? So, and we just increasingly live in a world where you can't openly talk about somebody even 25. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? One of the most woke people on the planet, right? She wasn't even in the grave a year before journalists were coming out and saying she said all kinds of super non-woke stuff. And people were like, oh, I don't know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she said some pretty, she had some very unwoke ideas. like we just don't have any tolerance for historical figures, which is, I think, very sad. And I think it's a problem, and I hope maybe it's going to get fixed. I think there are some clues that it is going to get fixed. One of the reasons why is I could be wrong. I think it's getting harder to cancel people. I think there is a cultural shift, and people are like, this sucks. So we're like, and are saying, hey, maybe maybe canceled people can come back. And there's been some really specific proof of this, where somebody who was canceled just walks right back in and like, hey, I'm uncanceled, right? And I don't think a while ago people would have been surprised to see that, right? So I think what's happening right now on the Wizards of the Coast design team is you have Gygax allies, Gygax champions, who, because the world just doesn't accept historical heroes anymore and tries to tear all of them down, keep it on the down low. Like, you don't talk about it, but definitely put put in content into the game that really brings Gygax up. Then there are Gygax opposers. I will admit wholeheartedly, I think there are definitely Gygax opposers on the Wizards of the Coast staff. I think they're in the minority. I think they're at about 20%, right? But I think, and I think the Gygax supporters are at about a 40%. And then there's the last group, which is the Gygax marinated, right? People who are like, I don't care about Gary Gygax. I don't care about Ed Greenwood. I don't care about Mike Merles. I don't care about Jonathan Tweet. I don't care about Rob Hainstu. I don't care about any of the traditional, I don't care about Moldvay or Holmes or any of the great, Gygax, any of the great Dungeons and Dragons historical heroes, right? I don't care about any of them, right? All I care about is D&D, right? And I think those people, they're Gygax marinated. They love Dungeons and Dragons, and they just go headlong into Dungeons and Dragons. And I think they come out being functional, practical Gygax allies just because they love the game so much. And I really feel that Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and Gary Gygax are braided together with metal cord. Like, they're just inseparable, okay? But let me present to you today one of the strongest pieces of evidence I've found that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition absolutely is championing and lifting up Gary Gygax's legacy. And that is Mordenkainen. Okay? Alright, so Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition started in 2014. Here we are 8 years later, okay, in 2022. And what's happening in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Well, one of the things they're realizing is that their lore is incredibly valuable, but it has to be reduxed, right? So there was a lot of cruft in Dungeons & Dragons lore, right? There's a lot of totally unnecessary nonsense, right? So I'll give you an example. Faerun, Forgotten Realms, that stuff is gold, man. Like, it is really important, right? And it is the winning setting. Forgotten Realms has defeated all other Dungeons & Dragons settings, and when you say Dungeons & Dragons, people think Forgotten Realms, right? Mystara, completely duplicative to Forgotten Realms, utterly unnecessary, and really belongs in the dustbin of history. Greyhawk, okay? Cool setting. I like it, right? Definitely belongs in the dustbin of history. And the reason why is it is not distinct enough from Forgotten Realms to have its own, to be considered, right? And so what's happening right now in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is Greyhawk has enough cool stuff where basically they're like, we ain't going to throw away this cool Greyhawk stuff. We're going to shove it into Forgotten Realms, which I think is a great plan. And so I think Greyhawk is never going to be, you're never going to get a Greyhawk book in 5th edition, ever, right? And I think that's wise. I don't think there's any reason to make a Greyhawk book. It makes absolutely no logical sense to have a Greyhawk book, because it's just too close to Faerun, and it wouldn't be helpful or useful, and it would distract from being a Dungeons & Dragons setting, right? Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has done a great job of having distinct settings, right? It has Eberron as an official setting. Very distinct, very unlike Forgotten Realms, right? There's a use for it. Exandria, that is distinct, and also it's coming from a unique voice. It's coming from Matthew Mercer. He's an incredible talent today. He's very modern, and he's created this very cool setting called Exandria. And it's an official Dungeons & Dragons setting. It's right in there. It's great, right? And it's distinct from Forgotten Realms. It really does have different kingdoms, different lore, different deities. It's distinct, right? So all these are in there, right? And then you have Theros and Ravnica. You have Arcavios, which is the new setting coming out for Strixhaven. That has a very unusual function. Arcavios really serves as a launching point for powerful casters for any and all of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition settings. And of course, Arcavios is really special too. It's really it is an entire setting that takes like every caster class and says, you're no longer playing a wizard in Eberron, right? What you're doing now is you have a wizard in Eberron, have fun, enjoy that, run your, start at 6th level, run to 12th, right? And then let's go back and tell the story of levels 1 through 6, when you learned everything you needed to be a good caster on Eberron in Strixhaven. And then let's go back and let's tell your years as a professor at Strixhaven in a 3rd campaign, right? And Strixhaven just blows the doors off of any setting book ever created, because it says, for these large number of classes in Dungeons & Dragons, here's your prequel campaign, and here's your sequel campaign. And no other classes beyond the Classer classes have this. Like, Strixhaven is truly this unique special thing, right? So we have all these settings, right? Well, the other thing that we have in 5th edition right now is the specific naming, the pounding the stakes in the ground for famous Dungeons & Dragons characters, right? Xanathar is now famous, right? He is the most famous beholder ever, because we have Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Tasha is the most famous witch in Dungeons & Dragons, because we have Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, right? And these are books that are on the shelves that millions of people are seeing, right? And then also Volo. They're saying, hey, Volo's important. Volo's all over the Waterdeep book, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and of course Volo has his own guide to monsters, right? So Volo is now famous. So you have you have Volo, and then you have Tasha, and you have Xanathar, all super famous, specific people. Well, here's the one that stakes into the ground that there are still Gygax champions at Wizards of the Coast. Mordenkainen is the only one of any of these all famous characters, famous Dungeons & Dragons characters, to get more than one book. So you have Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and now we have Mordenkainen Presents the Monsters of the Multiverse. So Mordenkainen is being used again, highlighted again, made famous again, and Mordenkainen is also specially celebrated within the Magic the Gathering setting, right? The Adventures in Forgotten Realms, the actual Magic the Gathering card set, really unique, really special, right? So you have all this going on, right, with Mordenkainen, and get this. So here's the kicker. Who got lifted up and who got put down, okay? Mordenkainen lifted up. He's podiumed, right? He's remembered. He's special. Mordenkainen. Mordenkainen is a Greyhawk wizard from Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax created Mordenkainen, right? So every time somebody picks up Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and goes, who the heck is Mordenkainen? They go right to Wikipedia, and there they find Mordenkainen was created by Gary Gygax. Who's Gary Gygax? Let's learn all about him, right? And you get your YouTube videos, and you learn about Gary Gygax. Elminster, exactly the same level as Mordenkainen, exactly the same dude as Mordenkainen, super high, powerful wizard, right? He comes from Ed Greenwood's official Forgotten Realms world, right? He's an Ed Greenwood creation. Elminster is not, he is like forgotten in 5th edition. I think he might be mentioned once in one of the source books, but he's never got the title role, right? He's not getting that Xanathar, Tasha's, Volo's treatment, right? They're like, nah, Elminster who, right? But Gary Gygax's creation is put at the top, right? So when you put Mordenkainen's name on a book, you are pointing a bold, thick, black, undotted line directly to Gary Gygax, right? So the idea that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition does not directly honor Gygax's legacy is simply untrue, and there's evidence for what I'm saying, and this is strong evidence. Mordenkainen, up. Gary Gygax, up. Okay? Elminster who? Barely mentioned in the books. I think he's mentioned once. He has no title, and he's never, and he's certainly not putting his name 2 inches high on a print run of 250,000 books, right? Which I'm starting to think that's what the print runs on Dungeons & Dragons books are, right? And so, they're not celebrating Ed Greenwood's wizard. They're celebrating Gary Gygax's wizard. And so the reality is, it is unfortunate that Gygax's name is not listed in the books, but Gygax is not forgotten in 5th edition, and frankly, he is elevated with every single printed book and with every single run game. And I do think, each book honors Gygax in different ways. It would be nice if his name was in there directly. It's not. That's where we're at. However, Mordenkainen, Gary Gygax's primary wizard, is the rock star marquee wizard of Dungeons & Dragons, right? And by making that choice, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is continuing to tie themselves to Gygax. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.